October 8th, 1995. Charlotte, North Carolina. A young teacher, a life cut short, a mystery that lasted decades. Some secrets are buried so deep that even time itself seems powerless to unearth them. But in the quiet suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, one family's nightmare would prove that the truth, no matter how carefully concealed, always finds a way to surface. The morning of October 7th, 1995, started like any other Saturday in the peaceful neighborhood of Eastwood. Children rode their bicycles down tree-lined streets while parents tended to their weekend routines. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of another ordinary day. But by sunset, this tranquil community would be forever changed by a discovery that would haunt investigators for decades. 24-year-old Victoria Chen had everything to live for. A recent graduate from the University of North Carolina with a degree in elementary education, she had just landed her dream job teaching second grade at Eastwood Elementary School. Her colleagues described her as dedicated, compassionate, and endlessly patient with her students. Victoria lived alone in a modest apartment on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the school where she poured her heart into shaping young minds. Victoria's routine was predictable, almost ritualistic in its consistency. Every weekday morning at 7:30, she would walk to the corner coffee shop, order her usual vanilla latte, and arrive at school by 8 o'clock sharp. Her students adored her gentle nature and creative teaching methods. She had a special gift for making even the most reluctant learners excited about reading and mathematics. On weekends, Victoria maintained an equally structured schedule. Saturday mornings were reserved for grocery shopping at the local Harris Teeter, followed by lunch with her roommate from college, Patricia Williams. The 2 young women had remained close friends since graduation, bonding over their shared passion for education and their dreams of making a difference in children's lives. Patricia had moved to Raleigh after graduation, but she made the 2-hour drive to Charlotte every other weekend to maintain their friendship. October 7th was supposed to be one of those special Saturdays. Victoria had planned to introduce Patricia to her new boyfriend, David Rodriguez, a 26-year-old carpenter she had met at a community volunteer event 3 months earlier. The relationship was still new, but Victoria's friends noticed a change in her demeanor. She seemed happier, more confident, and frequently mentioned David's kindness and sense of humor. Her sister, Margaret Chen, who lived in nearby Gastonia, had spoken with Victoria just 2 days before that fateful Saturday. Victoria had been excited about the upcoming weekend plans and had mentioned wanting to cook dinner for David and Patricia, but Victoria never made it to the grocery store that morning. When Patricia arrived at Victoria's apartment at noon, expecting to find her friend ready for their planned shopping trip, she discovered the front door slightly ajar. The apartment was eerily quiet, with Victoria's purse still sitting on the kitchen counter and her car keys hanging on their usual hook by the door. Patricia called out Victoria's name repeatedly, her voice echoing through the empty rooms. A growing sense of unease settled in her stomach as she noticed Victoria's bed appeared to have been slept in, but there were no other signs of her friend anywhere in the apartment. The coffee maker was still full, untouched since the previous evening. Within minutes, Patricia was on the phone with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, reporting her friend as missing. The responding officers initially treated it as a routine missing person case, assuming Victoria might have gone for an early morning walk or decided to run errands earlier than usual. But as the hours passed and Victoria failed to return home or contact anyone, the situation took on a more ominous tone. By evening, when Victoria had missed her planned dinner with David and Patricia, the police upgraded their response. A full-scale search was about to begin, but what they would discover would transform a simple missing person case into one of North Carolina's most baffling murder mysteries. The mid-1990s in Charlotte represented a time of unprecedented growth and transformation. The city was shedding its reputation as a sleepy southern town and emerging as a major financial hub. Bank of America had recently established its headquarters downtown, drawing young professionals from across the country who were eager to build careers in the booming economy. The population was swelling, new subdivisions were sprouting up monthly, and the sense of small-town security was gradually giving way to big city anonymity. Eastwood, where Victoria Chen had chosen to make her home, embodied this transition perfectly. Originally developed in the 1960s as a middle-class neighborhood for families working in Charlotte's textile industry, it had evolved into a diverse community that attracted young professionals, retirees, and growing families. The tree-lined streets featured a mix of ranch-style homes and modest apartment complexes, creating an atmosphere that felt both suburban and accessible. The neighborhood's crown jewel was Eastwood Elementary School, a brick building constructed in 1972 that served as the heart of the community. Parents regularly volunteered in classrooms, attended PTA meetings, and organized fundraisers for playground equipment. The school's reputation for academic excellence and dedicated teachers like Victoria had made Eastwood a desirable place for young families to settle. Victoria's journey to Charlotte had begun in her hometown of Asheville, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. She was the youngest of 3 children born to immigrants who had fled Taiwan in the 1960s, seeking better opportunities for their family. Her parents, Dr. James Chen and nurse Linda Chen, had instilled in their children the values of hard work, education, and community service. Growing up, Victoria had always been drawn to helping others. In high school, she tutored struggling classmates and volunteered at the local library's reading program for underprivileged children. Her decision to pursue elementary education surprised no one who knew her well. She possessed a natural ability to connect with children and an infinite patience that made her ideally suited for the classroom. After graduating from UNC Chapel Hill in May 1995, Victoria had several job offers across North Carolina. She chose Charlotte specifically because of Eastwood Elementary's progressive teaching philosophy and the principal's commitment to innovative educational methods. The salary was modest, but Victoria was more interested in making a meaningful impact than accumulating wealth. Her apartment on Maple Street reflected her practical nature and artistic sensibilities. The one-bedroom unit was furnished with pieces she had collected from thrift stores and garage sales, which she had lovingly restored and painted in cheerful colors. The walls were covered with artwork created by her students, thank you notes from parents, and photographs of her family and college friends. Victoria's social circle in Charlotte was small but close-knit. Besides her friendship with Patricia Williams, she had developed relationships with several colleagues at Eastwood Elementary. The teaching staff was known for their camaraderie, often gathering for Friday evening dinners at local restaurants or weekend hiking trips in the nearby Uwharrie National Forest. Her relationship with David Rodriguez had brought a new dimension to her life in Charlotte. They had met in September at a Habitat for Humanity build, where Victoria was volunteering her Saturday to help construct homes for low-income families. David, a skilled carpenter, was leading the framing crew. Their shared commitment to community service had sparked an immediate connection. David worked for a well-established construction company that specialized in custom homes in Charlotte's expanding suburbs. He was known among his colleagues as reliable, hard-working, and genuinely kind. His co-workers often remarked on his willingness to help others, whether teaching apprentices new skills or staying late to ensure projects were completed properly. The couple had been taking their relationship slowly, mindful of Victoria's focus on her new teaching position and David's demanding work schedule. They typically saw each other twice a week, usually for dinner and a movie or quiet evenings at Victoria's apartment, where she would grade papers while David read or worked on small woodworking projects. October 1995 had been particularly busy for both of them. Victoria was preparing her students for their first parent-teacher conferences, while David was working overtime to complete a large residential project before the winter weather arrived. Despite their hectic schedules, they had been looking forward to the weekend when Patricia would visit, seeing it as an opportunity to blend their separate worlds. The search for Victoria Chen began at dawn on Sunday, October 8, 1995. Charlotte Mecklenburg Police organized systematic sweeps of the Eastwood neighborhood, focusing initially on the wooded areas behind the elementary school and the small creek that meandered through the community. Volunteers from the school district joined law enforcement officers, creating search teams that combed through every possible location where Victoria might have wandered or been taken. Detective Raymond Foster, a 15-year veteran of the force, was assigned as the lead investigator. His experience with missing person cases had taught him that the first 48 hours were critical, and something about Victoria's disappearance troubled him deeply. The unlocked apartment door, the untouched coffee, and the complete absence of any indication she had left voluntarily all pointed to foul play. The breakthrough came on Monday morning when a jogger discovered Victoria's body in Reedy Creek Park, approximately 4 miles from her apartment. The park, a popular destination for families and outdoor enthusiasts, featured hiking trails that wound through dense woodland along the creek bed. Victoria's body was found in a secluded area, roughly 50 yards from the main trail, partially concealed beneath fallen leaves and branches. The crime scene immediately revealed the brutal nature of Victoria's death. She had suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to her head and upper body. The medical examiner would later determine that she had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object, likely a piece of metal or thick wooden implement. The savage nature of the attack suggested either extreme rage or a deliberate attempt to ensure she could not survive to identify her attacker. Victoria's clothing was torn and disheveled, but there were no immediate signs of sexual assault. Her purse and jewelry were missing, initially leading investigators to consider robbery as a possible motive. However, the location where her body was discovered raised immediate questions about how she had arrived at the park. Her car remained parked outside her apartment, and there were no witnesses who had seen her in the area. The positioning of the body indicated that Victoria had not been killed at the location where she was found. The lack of significant blood evidence at the scene, combined with the careful placement beneath natural debris, suggested her killer had transported her there after the murder. This revelation expanded the investigation's scope dramatically, as detectives now had to determine both where the actual crime had occurred and how the perpetrator had moved Victoria's body without detection. Forensic examination of the crime scene yielded frustratingly little physical evidence. The October weather had been particularly rainy, and any potential footprints or tire tracks had been washed away by the time Victoria's body was discovered. The killer appeared to have been methodical in cleaning up after themselves, leaving behind no obvious clues that could immediately point to their identity. The medical examiner estimated that Victoria had been dead for approximately 36 to 48 hours when her body was found, placing the time of death sometime during the early morning hours of Saturday, October 7th. This timeline aligned with Patricia Williams' account of finding Victoria's apartment empty when she arrived for their planned shopping trip. The autopsy revealed additional disturbing details about Victoria's final moments. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms indicated she had fought desperately against her attacker. The pattern of injuries suggested the assault had been prolonged and vicious, with the killer continuing to strike even after Victoria had likely lost consciousness. Most troubling to investigators was the complete absence of any logical explanation for how Victoria had ended up at Reedy Creek Park. She had no known connection to the area and had never mentioned visiting the park to any of her friends or family members. The location seemed deliberately chosen by someone familiar with the area's secluded spots and low foot traffic during early morning hours. Detective Raymond Foster's investigation began with the people closest to Victoria Chen, following standard protocol for homicide cases. David Rodriguez immediately became a person of interest, not because of any evidence linking him to the crime, but simply due to his intimate relationship with the victim. The statistics were sobering. In cases involving young women, romantic partners were responsible for the murder in over 60% of instances. David's alibi for the night of October 6th and early morning of October 7th appeared solid initially. He claimed to have been at home alone, preparing for the weekend plans with Victoria and Patricia. However, his inability to provide witnesses to corroborate his whereabouts during the critical time frame made investigators suspicious. David worked construction, giving him access to tools that could have been used as weapons, and his knowledge of Charlotte's layout meant he would have known about secluded areas like Reedy Creek Park. The interrogation of David Rodriguez lasted nearly 12 hours across 3 separate sessions. Detective Foster pressed him repeatedly about inconsistencies in his timeline, particularly regarding when he had last spoken with Victoria. David initially stated he had called her Friday evening around 8 o'clock, but phone records showed no such call. When confronted with this discrepancy, David claimed he must have been mistaken about the timing, suggesting it might have been Thursday evening instead. This apparent lie became the foundation for the police department's focus on David as their primary suspect. Foster believed that David was deliberately obscuring his contact with Victoria to hide evidence of a relationship conflict that might have escalated to violence. The detective theorized that David had gone to Victoria's apartment early Saturday morning, perhaps to confront her about something, and the situation had spiraled out of control. The investigation took a dramatic turn when a witness came forward claiming to have seen a man matching David's description near Reedy Creek Park early Saturday morning. Margaret Thompson, an elderly woman who walked her dog along the park's perimeter every morning, told police she had noticed a Hispanic male in work clothes acting nervously near the park entrance around 6:30 a.m. on October 7th. Her description of the man's height, build, and general appearance seemed to align with David Rodriguez. Based on Margaret Thompson's testimony and the inconsistencies in David's statements, the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department arrested him on October 18th, 11 days after Victoria's body was discovered. The arrest made front-page news in the Charlotte Observer, with headlines proclaiming that Victoria's killer had been caught. The community expressed relief that the perpetrator was in custody, and many residents felt they could finally feel safe in their neighborhood again. However, the case against David Rodriguez began to unravel almost immediately. His defense attorney, Robert Harrison, hired a private investigator who discovered that David had actually been at a construction site in Gastonia during the time frame when Margaret Thompson claimed to have seen him at Reedy Creek Park. Time-stamped security footage from the construction company showed David arriving at the job site at 5:45 a.m. on October 7th, making it physically impossible for him to have been at the park 30 minutes later. Further investigation revealed that Margaret Thompson suffered from early-stage macular degeneration, significantly impairing her ability to identify faces or distinguish details at any distance. The defense also produced David's work schedule, showing he had been assigned to the Gastonia project for the entire week leading up to Victoria's murder, requiring him to leave Charlotte by 5:30 each morning. The phone record discrepancy that had initially made David appear deceptive was explained when investigators discovered that Victoria's phone had been experiencing intermittent service problems throughout the week. The phone company confirmed that several incoming calls during that period had not been properly logged due to technical issues with the switching equipment serving her apartment complex. On November 3, 1995, all charges against David Rodriguez were dropped. The district attorney's office issued a public apology, acknowledging that the rush to arrest had been premature and based on insufficient evidence. David's reputation in the community was severely damaged, and he ultimately moved away from Charlotte, unable to cope with the lingering suspicion and media attention. The failed prosecution of David Rodriguez set the investigation back significantly, consuming valuable time and resources while the real killer remained free. After the embarrassing failure of the David Rodriguez prosecution, the Victoria Chen murder investigation entered a frustrating period of stagnation. Detective Raymond Foster found himself back at square one, with no viable suspects and a crime scene that had yielded precious little forensic evidence. The department reassigned several officers to other cases, leaving Foster with a reduced team and mounting pressure from his superiors to produce results. The investigation expanded to include a broader examination of Victoria's life, searching for any connections or conflicts that might have led to her murder. Detectives interviewed every teacher at Eastwood Elementary, questioned parents of her students, and examined her financial records for any irregularities. They found nothing suspicious. Victoria's life appeared to be exactly what it seemed, that of a dedicated young teacher with no enemies and no involvement in anything that would make her a target for violence. By the spring of 1996, the case had been officially designated as cold. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department maintained the file as an open investigation, but active pursuit of leads had essentially ceased. Foster was reassigned to other homicide cases, though he continued to review Victoria's file periodically, hoping for a breakthrough that never came. The impact on Victoria's family was devastating and long-lasting. Her parents, Dr. James Chen and Linda Chen, struggled to understand how their daughter's killer could simply vanish without a trace. They hired a private investigator in 1997, spending their retirement savings in a desperate attempt to find answers that law enforcement had been unable to provide. The private investigator uncovered no new evidence, leaving the family with depleted finances and unchanged grief. Margaret Chen, Victoria's sister, became consumed with seeking justice for her murdered sibling. She regularly contacted the police department, pleading for updates and pushing for renewed investigation efforts. Margaret organized annual memorial services at Eastwood Elementary, keeping Victoria's memory alive in the community while maintaining pressure on authorities to solve the case. The Eastwood neighborhood never fully recovered from the shock of Victoria's murder. Parents became more protective of their children, and the sense of safety that had characterized the community was permanently shattered. Many residents installed security systems and began locking doors that had previously remained open. The elementary school implemented new safety protocols, requiring all visitors to sign in at the main office and wear identification badges. Patricia Williams, Victoria's college friend, was haunted by guilt over her inability to prevent the tragedy. She had arrived at Victoria's apartment just hours after the murder had likely occurred, leading her to wonder if an earlier arrival might have saved her friend's life. Patricia eventually moved to California, unable to remain in North Carolina, where every familiar location reminded her of Victoria. The local media periodically revisited the case on anniversaries of Victoria's death, but public interest gradually waned as years passed without progress. The Charlotte Observer published retrospective articles in 2000 and 2005, highlighting the case as one of the area's most baffling unsolved murders. These articles generated brief, renewed attention, but no significant new leads. Detective Foster retired from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in 2008, carrying the weight of several unsolved cases, but none affected him more deeply than Victoria Chen's murder. He had spent 13 years periodically reviewing the file, hoping that advancing forensic technology or a deathbed confession might finally provide the breakthrough the case desperately needed. By 2010, Victoria's murder had become a footnote in Charlotte's criminal history, remembered primarily by her family and a few dedicated investigators who refused to let the case disappear entirely. The file remained in the cold case division, gathering dust alongside hundreds of other unsolved crimes that had stumped law enforcement over the decades. In January 2018, Detective Angela Martinez was assigned to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's newly expanded cold case unit. the department had received federal funding to modernize their approach to unsolved crimes, investing in advanced DNA technology and hiring specialists trained in genetic genealogy. Martinez, a 10-year veteran with a reputation for meticulous attention to detail, was tasked with reviewing cases from the 1990s that might benefit from these new investigative tools. Victoria Chen's murder file was among the first cases Martinez examined. She was immediately struck by the thoroughness of the original investigation and the frustrating lack of physical evidence that had stymied Detective Foster's efforts. However, Martinez noticed something that previous investigators had overlooked: a small fabric sample that had been collected from underneath Victoria's fingernails during the autopsy, but never properly tested due to the limited DNA technology available in 1995. The fabric sample was microscopic, barely visible to the naked eye, and had been preserved in the evidence locker for over 2 decades. Martinez sent the sample to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation's Forensic Laboratory, where technicians used advanced extraction techniques to isolate a partial DNA profile. The profile was incomplete, containing only enough genetic markers to eliminate suspects rather than definitively identify the perpetrator, but it represented the first concrete lead in the case since 1995. Martinez's next step involved uploading the partial DNA profile to the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national database of genetic evidence from crime scenes and convicted offenders. The search yielded no immediate matches, but Martinez wasn't discouraged. She knew that the database was constantly growing as more jurisdictions submitted evidence from cold cases and as new offenders were processed through the criminal justice system. While waiting for potential DNA matches, Martinez decided to re-examine the original investigation with fresh eyes. She spent weeks reviewing witness statements, crime scene photographs, and evidence reports, looking for connections that might have been missed. Her attention was drawn to a series of similar attacks that had occurred in the Charlotte area during the late 1990s and early 2000s, cases that had never been linked to Victoria's murder. Between 1997 and 2003, 3 other young women in Charlotte had been attacked in isolated locations, though they had survived their encounters. The victims described their attacker as a white male in his 30s with distinctive scarring on his left hand. The attacks had occurred in different parts of the city, and the original investigators had not identified a pattern connecting them to Victoria's case. Martinez contacted the survivors of these attacks, now women in their 40s, and asked them to review the case files from Victoria's murder. One of the survivors, Helen Rodriguez, immediately recognized the location where Victoria's body had been found. Helen revealed that she had been attacked in Reedy Creek Park in 1999, just 4 years after Victoria's murder, but had managed to escape when other joggers approached the area. This revelation prompted Martinez to expand her investigation to include attacks on women throughout the greater Charlotte metropolitan area. Working with neighboring jurisdictions, she identified 7 additional cases between 1995 and 2005 that shared similar characteristics. Young women attacked in secluded outdoor locations by a perpetrator who used blunt force weapons and appeared to have extensive knowledge of the local area. The pattern that emerged suggested a serial offender who had been active for at least a decade, with Victoria Chen potentially being his first victim. The attacks had gradually decreased in frequency after 2003, leading Martinez to theorize that the perpetrator had either moved away from the area, been incarcerated for other crimes, or had died. In March 2019, Martinez received the breakthrough she had been hoping for. The DNA profile from Victoria's case had generated a familial match in the CODIS database. The match wasn't to the perpetrator himself, but to a relative whose DNA had been submitted as part of an unrelated investigation in Virginia. Using genetic genealogy techniques, Martinez was able to construct a family tree that led her to identify potential suspects. The investigation focused on 42-year-old Kenneth Walsh, a former Charlotte resident who had moved to Virginia in 2006. Walsh had worked as a landscaper for various companies throughout the Charlotte area during the 1990s, giving him intimate knowledge of parks, trails, and secluded locations throughout the region. His work schedule was irregular, often requiring him to be in different parts of the city on various days, which would have provided opportunities to encounter potential victims. Martinez discovered that Walsh had been arrested in Virginia in 2007 for assault and battery, but the charges had been dropped when the victim declined to testify. He had also been questioned in connection with a sexual assault case in Richmond in 2010, though he was never charged. Most significantly, Walsh had a distinctive scar on his left hand from a childhood accident, matching the description provided by the survivors of the Charlotte attacks. The final piece of evidence came when Martinez obtained a court order to collect a DNA sample from Walsh. The sample was a perfect match to the genetic material found under Victoria Chen's fingernails, conclusively linking him to her murder after nearly 24 years. On April 11, 2019, Kenneth Walsh was arrested at his home in Richmond, Virginia, and charged with the first-degree murder of Victoria Chen. The arrest of Kenneth Walsh sent shockwaves through both the Charlotte community and the law enforcement agencies that had worked tirelessly on Victoria Chen's case for nearly a quarter-century. News of the breakthrough spread rapidly through social media and local news outlets, with many residents expressing disbelief that the killer had been living freely for so long while Victoria's family suffered without answers. Detective Angela Martinez found herself at the center of a media storm as reporters sought to understand how advanced DNA technology had finally cracked a case that had stumped investigators for decades. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department held a press conference on April 12, 2019, where Chief Johnny Jennings praised Martinez's dedication and highlighted the importance of never giving up on cold cases, no matter how much time had passed. The revelation that Kenneth Walsh had potentially been responsible for multiple attacks throughout the Charlotte area prompted a comprehensive review of unsolved cases from the 1990s and early 2000s. Law enforcement agencies across North Carolina began re-examining their files, looking for crimes that might be connected to Walsh's pattern of violence. Within weeks, investigators had linked him to at least 5 additional assaults, transforming what had been isolated incidents into a clear pattern of serial predatory behavior. For Victoria's family, the arrest brought a complex mixture of relief, grief, and anger that had been building for 24 years. Dr. James Chen and Linda Chen, now in their 80s, had never stopped believing that their daughter's killer would eventually be found, but they had also resigned themselves to the possibility that they might not live to see justice served. The news of Walsh's arrest reinvigorated their hope while simultaneously reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Margaret Chen, Victoria's sister, had become the family's primary advocate over the years, maintaining contact with law enforcement and organizing annual memorial services. Her reaction to the arrest was immediate and emotional, describing it as the first time in decades that she had felt any sense of peace regarding her sister's death. Margaret had spent years wondering if the killer was someone she might encounter in daily life, never knowing that Walsh had left Charlotte more than a decade earlier. Patricia Williams, Victoria's college friend who had discovered the empty apartment that October morning in 1995, learned of the arrest through a phone call from Margaret Chen. Patricia had carried guilt about Victoria's death for 24 years, wondering if she could have somehow prevented the tragedy by arriving earlier or encouraging Victoria to be more cautious. The arrest provided some measure of closure, though Patricia acknowledged that no amount of justice could bring back her friend or erase the trauma of that discovery. The Eastwood Elementary School community, where Victoria had taught for only a few months before her death, organized a special memorial service following Walsh's arrest. Many of Victoria's former colleagues had retired or moved away, but those who remained gathered to remember the young teacher whose life had been cut short just as her career was beginning. The current principal announced that the school's library would be renamed in Victoria's honor, ensuring that future generations of students would learn about her dedication to education. Kenneth Walsh's arrest also had profound implications for the survivors of his other attacks. Helen Rodriguez, who had escaped from Walsh in Reedy Creek Park in 1999, expressed gratitude that her attacker had finally been identified and would face justice. For Helen and the other survivors, Walsh's arrest validated their experiences and confirmed that they had been targeted by a dangerous predator rather than being victims of random crimes. The legal proceedings against Walsh moved forward with remarkable speed, aided by the overwhelming DNA evidence linking him to Victoria's murder. Walsh's defense attorney attempted to negotiate a plea agreement that would spare his client the death penalty, but prosecutors remained committed to seeking the maximum punishment allowed under North Carolina law. The strength of the forensic evidence made Walsh's guilt virtually undeniable, eliminating most potential defense strategies. During the investigation that followed his arrest, Walsh confessed to killing Victoria Chen, though he provided few details about his motive or the specific circumstances of the crime. He claimed that the attack had not been premeditated, describing it as an encounter that had escalated beyond his control. However, the pattern of his subsequent attacks suggested a level of planning and predatory behavior that contradicted his claims of spontaneous violence. The trial of Kenneth Walsh began in February 2020, drawing significant media attention and filling the courtroom with Victoria's family members, former colleagues, and community supporters. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on DNA evidence, witness testimony from Walsh's other victims, and expert analysis of the crime scene. The defense offered little substantive challenge to the evidence, focusing instead on arguing for a life sentence rather than execution. On March 8, 2020, Kenneth Walsh was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Victoria Chen. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning their verdict, and Walsh was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that while the death penalty had been considered, the family's preference for a life sentence had influenced the final decision. The resolution of Victoria Chen's murder case became a symbol of hope for families of other cold case victims throughout North Carolina. Detective Martinez received numerous commendations for her work, and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department expanded their cold case unit to handle the increased workload generated by advances in DNA technology. 25 years after Victoria Chen's life was brutally ended, justice had finally been served, proving that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually surface.